Who would have thought that Nonfiction November, my first Nonfiction November, would get so emotional for me? Well, it did. Aloha and welcome back to my channel, The Baby Boomer Booktuber, with me, Marilyn Maya. Today is a very special day for me because it's Nonfiction November, or at least it's not November yet, but this is going to be my TBR for Nonfiction November. I wanted to show you that I'm wearing a feather lei, and in Hawaiian, a feather lei is called a lei hulu, and it symbolized cherished elders. And I guess I'm a cherished elder, but this nonfiction is dedicated to all the older people that have been very important in my life. So not only am I wearing a Plumera lei flower, which I have a tree in my yard, and I love Plumera. They smell really good. I wish I could bring that smell, that scent to you right now. But the feather lei is something that I didn't really know how important it was in Hawaiian culture. And the reason I'm talking about Hawaiian culture is not only because I live in Hawaii, but because my first book is about an indigenous woman. Not of Hawaii, but an American native indigenous woman. But first I want to talk about Nonfiction November. And it was started by a book olive, and she was one of the first booktubers that I met through BookTube, and I love nonfiction. Nonfiction has always been very special to me. Especially memoirs and true crime. But I love all nonfiction. And I have quite a few books in different genres of nonfiction. The genre is nonfiction, but there's subgenres in nonfiction, so many. And I'm learning more and more every day through Book Olive. And there are other booktubers who are involved in this readathon, and I will have them linked below in the description box. And this is my first year, but I read the Book Olive's, a Book Olive, her 4 words that she puts out as prompts. And although I'm not going to follow them exactly, and she doesn't, and she says that you can follow them or not follow them any way you want. But just to tell you, the 4 prompts this year are time, movement, buzz, and discovery. And they also have a reading where everyone reads the same book. And this year it's The Yellow House, which I've heard about. It's a really buzzed book that from Sarah M. Broom, and it won the Booker Prize, or it won a prize in 2019. So I'm going to start my TBR with a book that I read before, and it's called Heartberries by Terese Marie Mailhot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But when I first read this book, I thought it was very painful, very beautiful. She's a poet, and she's an indigenous woman as well. And I thought I wasn't qualified to really speak of it or understand it. But the book kept on coming back in my mind, and I wanted to reread it. And the reason I wanted to reread it is because not only is it poetic and it won many prizes, but it's written in essays as letters. And when I read all of these books, or I haven't read them all, but But when I looked at all these books, I realized that they all affected my life, or they're all memories or memoirs. I wrote my own memoir, and I'm writing part 2 of my memoir. And writing memoir is a very painful process. And Terese Marie Mailhot, her story has to do with how she grew up as an Indian. She calls herself Indian. And the first chapter is Indian Condition. And then there's Heartberries and Indian Sick. And she ends up in a mental hospital in part of this book, as I remember it. And I also had an episode where I went to a mental hospital, and reading that part was very emotional for me, because it, of course, we think it's about a marriage breaking up. In her case, she broke up with a boyfriend, but it's always about something else, something more personal, something more grave and important to our life than merely a breakup. And on the second reading of that chapter, I realized that, and I knew I had to reread it. And I really, really hope that everyone will read this, because there aren't enough books by Indigenous authors, first of all. And second of all, this woman, she's a poet. Her poetry is so beautiful, and her story is so beautiful. And you will understand more about the Indigenous experience by reading this book. I know I did. So I put this down in discovery, time, and movement, and buzz, because it has all of these aspects in this one book. And I hope that you read it. The second book is called Lovely by Anne Sebold. And I think this was written in 1994. Before she wrote The Lovely Bones. And it was written in 1999. I read this book because she has a quote that really touched me, and I even put it in my memoir, my second memoir. You save yourself or you remain unsaved. And this is a book about her getting raped in her teen years, when she was a virgin, in fact, and how a policeman or a detective said, "Wow, you're lucky." And you're lucky, in other words, you weren't killed, so you're lucky. And I read this a long time ago, and I want to reread it, but I heard that this is a book that tries to take out the stigma of rape. And I heard it's not written with self-pity, and it says it's a controlled and meticulous account. The quiet achievement of her memoir of her rape as a college freshman is that she handles her subject with the integrity of a journalist and the care of a survivor. And I think that she's a wonderful writer, and she writes very plainly, yet very emotional at the same time, without being self-pitying. And the subject of rape is one that people don't like to talk about. So I suggest that if you liked her writing in The Lovely Bones, or even if you didn't, I would pick up this book. But I plan to reread it again for Nonfiction November. And I'll put this under time, because she goes through a period of time where she has to digest what happened to her. And she does it with a lot of grace. So that's Lucky. Another book that is also time and is a similar book, it's a memoir. It's a New York Times notable book, Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Grealy, which also got a lot of buzz at the time, so it could come into time. This is a story of a young girl who gets cancer when she is like 9 years old, and she becomes disfigured, and the way that she handles the disfigurement and what happens to her through, well, I don't know if this is her whole life story. It says autobiography, but I'm not sure if it's a memoir. But I only read a few chapters. And let's see if I can just read the first. The first sentence is, I read the first chapter. So the first sentence is pony party. And it says, my friend Stephen and I used to do pony parties together. And what it's about is she loved horses and ponies, and she was, to be able to ride ponies, she had to take care of them. But it was her first job, and she's 13, and she feels she's already gone through the cancer and so many surgeries, and it's how she feels being seen and not seen, at least that chapter so far. And this is a literary memoir, as is the book that I was, the Heartberries, in that, what is a literary memoir anyway, you might ask? And I think it means it's a memoir that's written in a very moving way, either by poetry or the prose is very uplifting and different than just maybe a regular memoir. I'm not sure. I aspire to write a literary memoir, but these women have written literary memoirs. Lucy Grealy actually committed suicide not too long ago, and I don't know too much about it, but there's an afterword that I did read by one of her friends who is also a famous writer, and I don't think, her name is Ann Patchett, so if you know some of her books, please let me know below. Okay, the next discovery book that I have is The Turkish Lover by Esmeralda Santiago, a Latinx author who wrote when I was Puerto Rican. And I picked this up because her first book got a lot of buzz, but for me, it was not so much that I understood of her culture, my culture. I'm Puerto Rican, because it's about before she came to the United States. But the minute that I opened this book, I said, okay, she's in New York. She went to a school that I aspired to get into, the High School of Performing Arts, otherwise known as the Fame School. She has problems with her mother, and so did I. And I said, this is a book that I want to read. So it's a discovery for me, and I haven't read it yet, except for the first page, but in the back it says, it's in the tradition of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, one of my favorite ever fiction books about New York. And it has a unique Latin flavor, which I got from the first few pages. And she's a great writer. And it also gives you a time of New York, which I think she's younger than me, but I'm 70, so she might be in her 60s. I don't know. I'm going to find out. But anyway, I'm going to read this. My next book is a discovery for me, and it's called The Library Book by Susan Orlean. I have to admit, I'm not a fan of Susan Orlean's writing. I read a memoir about her, and I don't know I'm going to put the name of it in the description box because somebody might like it. The reason I didn't like it, it was less personal for me. It was more about her father than it was about her, and she's a journalist. And I did see this book. I subscribed to writers' magazines, the Writer's Digest, and she was on the cover and this book had just come out. And basically, it's about libraries, of course, that's why it's called the library book. And she was talking about it, and there was a fire at the Los Angeles Library on 1986. So she goes into the different things about libraries, what they are, what they mean to people. And I was very motivated to take this out of the library book out of the library. I knew that they would have it because libraries were very, very important in my life. We didn't buy books, we couldn't afford to. And most of my books came from the library after I was very young, when my mother did buy golden books to teach me to read. So libraries mean a lot to me, and I didn't know about the library fire in Los Angeles, and I wanted to learn more about it. It's also about librarians and about people that hang out in libraries, and it sounds very interesting to me. And she wrote The Orchid Thief, which I haven't read, but all her books seem to do very well. So I'm going to give this a shot since I'm interested in the subject. The last book that I have for Nonfiction November, this might be part one because I have many other books, but this is definitely a buzz book, and it's called The Third Rainbow Girl. And I heard about this on BookTube. This is all around BookTube when I started watching it before I started my own channel. And it's a true crime book and a memoir. So the true crime is the long life of a double murder in Appalachia. And it's about these two girls who were killed in Appalachia while they were going to a rainbow festival, maybe in 1980, I'm not sure. So it says it's part-time narrative and part-time soul-searching memoir. Emma Copley Eisenberg's The Third Rainbow Girl has so much wisdom to offer. It's about the corrosiveness of preconceived notions and about how trauma ripples through cultures and generations, and about finding connections in others and strength in oneself. Rich in detail and sensitivity and intelligence and honesty, this is a book you won't want to put down, one that will stay with you for a long time. And this was written by Robert Kolker, a New York Times bestselling author of Lost Girls, an unsolved American mystery, which I think I'm going to put on my TBR now that I just read that. But this reminds me a little bit of another book about Appalachia that I want to read, and I can't think of it right now, but it's about how different cultures clash, and boy, are we in that situation at the moment, and misconceptions about different cultures. And I'm very, very excited to read this book. And I will put the name of the other book that I'm thinking of down in the description box, and you probably know what it is already. It's about a man who talks about, it might be a nonfiction book, who talks about the culture of Appalachia and how it's misunderstood. So if you know the name of the book or you read it, tell me about it. So this is part one of my nonfiction TBR. I have more books. I have so many books, and I noticed that this TBR was very heavy on memoir. But I also read other nonfiction, and I want to share that in my part two of my nonfiction TBR. But I hope that you get something out of this. You want to read some of this. I'm very grateful for Nonfiction November. So thank you, Olive, and thank you to all the people that are participating. So if you like this, please subscribe and smash that notification bell, like and share also. And until we meet the next time, as an elder, so I'm not indigenous, but I do have indigenous ancestors, I will say aloha.